You're watching the Action Sports Jacks 24/7 network. Now it's time for the Brent and Austin Show.
I'll take a look at our Monday lineup here on the Action Sports Jacks 24/7 network. You know how to find it, actionsportsjacks.com. And, well, we are that second thing on the list. And Miller and Moulton just wrapped up Brent and Austin Show, getting ready to roll from Nimnik Buick GMC right off Phillips Highway live today. We've got a No Gate Fees replay. All parents, we went after you on this last episode of No Gate Fees, so make sure you check it out if you missed any of it at 1 o'clock. We'll talk a little golf at 2 o'clock, and then we revisit James Gladstone's first week back at 3 o'clock. Before it's Young and Norvelle. Patrick Young, of course, former Florida Gator. He'll talk about those Florida Gators who have now made it to the Sweet 16. One of the big stories on a Monday here in Northeast Florida on the Brent and Austin Show on the Action Sports Jacks 24/7 network. Hey, everybody, and welcome into Nimnik Buick GMC. Always good to be back here and in the showroom. Brent Martineau here, Austin Lane back in the Action Sports Jacks studios. We have Kim's Corner along the way today, too, so she will be helping us out. I think we've got our new segment, Mugshot Mondays, on the way. We've got to check out our brackets as well. We've got to send your Shock Your Mocks to us. We're going to start that on Wednesday, so send your Shock Your Mocks to sports at actionnewsjacks.com. Just some of the festivities here on a Monday. And Austin Lane, always good to be back here. We've got our Committed to the Uncommitted scholarship presentation today that we will give a young man from the football season a $2,500 scholarship, thanks to all the folks here at Nimnik Buick GMC for supporting that program where we feature under-recruited kids. And you'll meet that young man coming up a little bit later on in the show. So we like to pay that off here with a show from Nimnik Buick GMC. It's always a fun day here on the Brent and Austin Show.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the tournament's going on. No need to talk about the NCAA tournament, man. I'm sure the way that your bracket's looking, the way that my bracket's looking, not much to talk about, right? I mean, in terms of Cinderella stories, go and get them out of here, right? This is the True Bloods, right? This isn't any kind of Cinderella stories. Unfortunately, Cinderella is back at the house doing chores, washing dishes, scrubbing floors, and the fairy godmother said, "Nah, not this year. You just stay in your room and you just do what you're told."
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I mean, let's just jump right into it, right? We'll get to the Florida Gators here in a little bit as they survive. But if you really just look at the bracket now, this is not the way we like our March Madness, I don't think. One, my bracket's terrible. But two, the 10 seed of Arkansas is the only seed that is better than a 6 seed. So, like, higher than a 6 seed, which means Cinderella is just not dancing. Cinderella, the slipper is lost. The slipper doesn't fit anyone because Arkansas and John Calipari, quite frankly, don't really feel like a Cinderella, although by seeding, I guess they would be. Listen, you couldn't make every SEC school a top 6 seed, or maybe Arkansas would have been in that bunch as well, but they beat Kansas, and then they obviously get the win over St. John's. So this is just... This ain't your daddy's NCAA tournament where you're going to get the 12 seed, the 13 seed into the Sweet 16. In fact, that has none of that this year. And I guess, Austin, the product of the NIL maybe, right? The last couple of years in football and basketball, we wondered, well, maybe this NIL thing isn't going to be the haves and have-nots. Maybe this transfer portal thing won't be the haves and have-nots like we thought it would because we're still getting Cinderellas. We're still getting some parity in college football. Well, in college basketball this year, doesn't look like we've got parity. It looks like we've got the schools that are paying the most money have entered into the Sweet 16. You've got 7 SECs, you've got 4 Big Tens, you've got 4 Big 12s, and you've got 1 ACC. I mean, they might have already started this super conference with the way this thing looks like on your bracket right now. Now, that could make for a good Sweet 16, but it feels a little lackluster in terms of what the dance is all about.
Yeah, it does feel a little lackluster, right? Because we always want to cheer for the unheard of. We want to cheer for the underdog. And yeah, I mean, you're not getting a lot of that this year. And even last year, like, I guess NC State kind of fit the role of the Cinderella, but they kind of caught fire late towards the end of the season. And once again, like, NC State coming from the ACC, I'm not sure if they're really necessarily like the Cinderella story. Now, maybe where they're ranked, you can call it that, but they didn't really feel like it per se. So I think these last couple of years, maybe you've lacked the Butlers, the George Masons, and obviously NIL, I feel like has something to do with that. And I'm very curious to see going forward now if NIL has kind of ruined the Cinderella story. I mean, look at a team like Drake. Drake was a lot of people's favorite to make a run. It was my favorite. Obviously, that backfired in my face. But Drake had, 4 or 5 D2 transfers that were starters that kind of helped elevate their program. Like, that's what they're dealing with now. Like, that's what the modern day Cinderella story is going to have to be. It's going to have to be a bunch of transfers from D2, D3 that go to university for a year and then do something. Because let's be honest, if you look at Drake right now, and I'm not sure in terms of upperclassmen and lowerclassmen, but I'm sure some of those great players will probably transfer out and go to bigger schools now. It's just the way that the game works. So even if you do get a Cinderella story, it's not going to be precedented. It's not going to be cemented in lore for years to come like Butler was, just because if you have a talented team as an underdog, as a Cinderella, well, they're all going to leave the next year.
Well, and much like that happens with the coaches, and now the coaches just take their kids with them, right? McNeese State, who's going to end up going to NC State with Will Wade? Iowa just hired the Drake coach. Well, they take some with them, right? So, that's just the nature of it right now. You used to lose the coach. You didn't necessarily always lose the player, maybe one here or there, but now you might lose even more players with it. And the mid-majors just continue to get rated and maybe watered down to a degree, which takes away from the tournament, I think, at the outset. So I guess I just ask this. Is this a good or a bad NCAA tournament so far? Like, it sounds like you feel a little soured on it. I feel like we all feel like we're missing something on it. But I'll even take it a step further. I really don't feel like we've had a lot of good basketball games so far. We finally got some on Saturday night and a little bit yesterday with the buzzer beater, of course, but we haven't had a ton of really good games through the first opening weekend of 2025 NCAA tournament.
I think yesterday kind of put the precedent of some decent games. Like the Florida game was great. The Wisconsin game 2 nights ago was great. The Oregon game, we stayed up late for that one. Unfortunately, my son didn't get to stay up. We got to halftime, Brent. I can't do past 10:30 and justify it. Yeah, but obviously it was a rude awakening when he woke up this morning.
That was a good game.
Yeah, that was a great game. So there were some good games, I feel like, yesterday. But yeah, once again, I think you're missing the Cinderella story a little bit, but not to say it hasn't been an entertaining tournament. I think Maryland really showcased that yesterday. That's kind of like the talk of the town, if you will.
Yeah, I really think until we got to Saturday night, I think that BYU-Wisconsin game ended up really good. And then you're right, yesterday had a lot more good games. One other thing, Matthew Driscoll, I think, is going to join us a little bit later on in the week as we get ready for Sweet 16 time. But this will be this is just an observation without a deep dive into numbers. But do we have more teams scoring like in the mid upper 80s and 90s than like ever before? Remember, college basketball used to be a 60 to 70 point kind of game. Now it's like, look at all the teams scoring in the 90s. I don't know if that's a defensive thing. I don't know if it's because people are firing up 45 three-pointers a game. Yeah. But it's kind of interesting to me that we have this many high-scoring games. And therefore, I think we do see teams kind of racing out to like double-digit leads and everything else. But pretty wild that this many teams are hitting that 90 mark in the NCAA tournament. That is not a common thing if you go back and look at college basketball over the last decade or so.
No, I just feel like back in the day, the ultimate equalizer was slowing the game down a little bit, playing defense, especially if you're more of a smaller school, or if you're just a school as engraved in defense. Look at Virginia for all those years. They actually won a national championship based off their defense and their set plays. I think nowadays you have a lot more just isolation. You have a lot more just star players that can take over a game. Like it almost seems like every team in this tournament at least has one player that can just take over, if you will. And obviously some teams have more than one. So I just think with the emergence now of just more talent per se, I think that's kind of relating to more higher scores.
All right. Well, we buried the lead. That is the Florida Gators. They survived the scare now. And listen, I don't think the two of us aren't Gator fans, but this is a fun basketball team to watch. And It would have been almost a shame, I think, if the Gators lost yesterday and didn't get to make a run in this tournament as good as we think they are, as good as they've proven to be. But hello, NCAA tournament. UConn had their number until finally the senior guards with Clayton and Richard really saved the day for Florida down the stretch, which, hey, you know what? The better teams usually prevail down the stretch, or at least that's the way it should happen. They execute. They did it. But the Florida Gators survive. They're going to have to play better than they've played, I think. They certainly haven't had their A-level game outside of the first 12, 15 minutes against Norfolk State in these first two games, Austin.
No, without a doubt, and I think the line was 10 or 10.5. I should know. I put it down, but it wasn't like that, and like when we talk about, yeah, no, for sure, right? Just because and I was comparing Florida to last year's UConn team, where I think they're so talented, where they're not going to get in a close game maybe until the final, and you had a little bit of a close game, right? And obviously give credit to UConn and Dan Hurley. It was a down year for them overall and everything, but they came out there, they played hard. Now, they would tell you that the refs also had something to do with it, and Dan Hurley would go on a language race tirade and say that, yeah, it was kind of the refs that screwed him over. I don't agree with that. Is Dan Hurley quickly becoming a little bit of an enigma in college basketball, where I feel like he was so loved and appreciated last year because, wow, this guy had a chance to go to the Lakers, coach LeBron and everything, and they said, you know what? I'm going to stay in UConn. I'm going to stay on the East Coast, and I'm going to coach my UConn Huskies. I think he was almost celebrated for doing that, because a lot of times we see coaches, take the cash, they take the next biggest thing, and Hurley didn't do that. And then this year, whether it's going after Creighton fans, whether it's in the media complaining, or now if you've seen the viral video of him after the game talking to Alabama players saying, and I'm paraphrasing here just for language purposes, but hopefully, you don't get screwed over like we got screwed over. It's been quite the year for Dan Hurley.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. He's going to be a next topic on this, but we can get to him right now. I mean, Hurley is, I think all sports need the villain. Hurley, listen, he did a great job at Rhode Island. He's got a big name in the game of basketball with his dad and his brother. You're right. I think there was a little bit of when he won the national championship, specifically back-to-back, it was hey, that's kind of cool. Everybody always talked about his dad and everybody talked about his brother, and then here's Dan Hurley, what about me? Well, he's taken what about me to a whole new level, because it's all about him. Every time they bounce a basketball on the sideline, every time they win a game, every time they lose a game, whether it's coming out of the tunnel, talking about the rings, whether it's on a podium, talking about his team. I mean, I guess it's great marketing. And again, you need a villain in sports, and I guess he's squarely become that. But what a 180, right? That for this guy, to your point. And I can't sit here and say I love it, but I kind of get it. And I think the sport is better for it when you have a guy that everybody wants to kind of root against, especially when they're the two-time defending national champions. I mean, if this guy coached Duke or Kentucky, it would be on steroids how much people don't like him, because he was with the brand name. UConn's got a good brand, but I don't think they have the name like that where everybody hates him. So it's wild, man. I don't. Listen, I do get it, because in my world, I've always said this, I've been saying this ever since I had a microphone in front of me in this business, that I think college football and college basketball, the Eagles can't hide themselves. The Eagles win. I mean, it's all about the big-time head coach in college football and college basketball, and they can say the nice things and the warm and fuzzy things if they want in front of a mic too, but at the end of the day, it comes right back to, hey, this is all about me, and look at me, and look at me, and this is why we've got salaries the way they are, this is why we got NIL the way they are, this is why we got transfer portal, because you said, look at me enough, where the kid was like, well, what about me? And so Dan Hurley's sitting there saying, look at me again, at every single turn, and I guess while nauseating, it probably is also good for the game.
I mean, yeah, I guess that's good for the game, but once again, I don't understand how we got here with Dan Hurley, because if it truly is about the ego, I think 9 out of 10 coaches in this position that got offered the Lakers job probably would have took the Lakers job, right? Because you won back-to-back championships. What more do you need to do, Dan Hurley, right? So I mean, at least I didn't. I feel like the entire country celebrated Dan Hurley because it was a pivot from what we're accustomed to seeing. while coach is taking the cash grab. So when he went back to UConn, it's like, oh, dude, you're in the good graces. Like, yeah, you're kind of the front runner, and we don't always like to cheer for the front runner. But the way that you did it, it's like maybe we can get behind UConn hoops and Dan Hurley just because he opted to stay there. How many times do we see coaches leave? How many times do we see coaches just chuck up the deuce and say, later, players, we'll see you later? Like, that's not what Dan Hurley did. So like we celebrated him, and then all of a sudden this year, where things aren't really going your way like you wanted to, possibly. And all of a sudden, it's like you're the villain. You're going after fans. You're saying 2 rings or whatever you're saying. Like, I don't know, man. If I was this PR person, I would have left a long time ago because you had it. Like, it was all set up for you to be like, and I say this like loosely, but kind of like a Coach K, where I feel like Duke was always hated, but I don't think Coach K was necessarily hated. I think Coach K was a little more respected than the Duke program. So like that's what Hurley had a chance to do, and instead you blame refs, you call out fans, and now you're the villain. Which, hey, more power to you. Maybe that's what you wanted to be. Maybe that puts your school even on a bigger map. You just didn't have to go down that road.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of somebody that's like him in sports, and I'm not even talking about the turn. I'm talking about the current right now, like where it's like everything is something. Whether it's complaining, whether it's him whining, whether it's like poor us, poor me,
listen,
the victim. Is there who else is like that in sports?
Well, I mean, I don't like making the comparison, but I think you took a lovable guy from one team and he came to the next team where everybody was questioning what he was saying in press conferences. That's Doug Peterson.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I get what you're saying. I think like the turn, I see what you're saying in the turn of the character development.
Think about it, like perception-wise. Yeah. So think about how we all, and this is back in 2017, when we all celebrated Doug Peterson because he took down the mighty Patriots juggernaut, and he did it with, a team that was full of underdogs. Like, we all celebrated that. We probably would have all bought his book if it was on Amazon, right? And then he comes to Jacksonville, and you're excited and everything, and just the way that this season went last year, where it was like, you guys wouldn't understand, and all these things, I feel like it kind of rubbed a lot of people the wrong way.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like his image in front of a microphone specifically, right? Or when cameras were rolling, certainly has a similar feel to that. I don't get the sense that Doug is as whiny as Hurley feels like he is, right? Like about everything.
Sure, yeah.
Like it's not poor me, and like I didn't feel like Doug was playing the victim card that much, but I get what you're saying. I think that's an interesting comp. My mind would not have gone there at all. I'm having a hard time just figuring out anybody that's kind of, Glenn says Mick Cronin is a little bit like that. Yeah, Cronin does have a little bit of that, like, big time kind of annoying coach feel to him. Nobody in the NBA has this feel. College football wise, I don't sense there's anybody that's like that right now. So it's not like Mike Norvelle turned that way once they got bad this past year. It's an odd case. Like it's because you said it, like the Krzyzewskis of the world or the Patinos of the world, they obviously had detractors and they're polarizing because of the programs, but they didn't really come off like they were everybody's out to get them. Like you never got that sense. I mean, it was kind of handled in a more buttoned up way in many respects. So I don't know. He's an odd case. Like he's an interesting cat from the character development side, the family side, because we know the name so well. And then also just if you just isolate it to what he does each and every game, there's something like they cannot play a game, Austin, where Dan Hurley's not the topic coming out of the game or in the game or whatever part of the game.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I'm trying to think of another guy. Do you think Lane...
Which is odd.
It's very odd. Do you think Lane Kiffin of old comes to mind? Because it's weird, because I feel like Lane Kiffin started out on good graces, then he went to bad graces, then... Okay, what was the journey of Lane Kiffin again? He was with his dad at... right? And then he goes to Tennessee? and then he goes to US.
It's a long journey.
Well, yeah. I'm just trying to think, like, he gets fired from Tennessee.
I'll tell you.
Then he goes to USC, I think.
He was he was at USC. If you want to go from the head coach, like, I mean, it goes all the way back to the Jags days, of course. But I'm
just trying to go from what he was like and hated. Yeah.
Yeah, so like USC for a bit there, then the Oakland Raiders for a couple years, then Tennessee, then USC,
okay. Yep,
then Alabama, then Florida Atlantic and Ole Miss.
So yeah, because I feel
no, go ahead.
Yeah, because I feel like once he left USC, he was definitely like not liked. And then he goes to the Alabama School of Hard Knocks with Nick Saban and, like, you know, kind of gets a little more of a humbling on the sidelines, it seemed like, with Nick Saban. And I feel like that changed his entire trajectory because then he goes to Florida Atlantic and, like, he's definitely the underdog, but, like, he embraces social media. He has fun with it. He gets some great recruits, and all of a sudden he starts building that resume again. And then he goes to Ole Miss, where I get